Welcome to Talking Pictures. My name is Christian Gensel. I'm a filmmaker and film journalist from Salzburg, Austria. Talking Pictures is a podcast series in which I talk to the people who made some of my favorite movies. This is the second part of our Chinatown series, where we discuss the making of Roman Polanski's 1974 masterpiece. And today's guest is character actor Allan Warnick. Chinatown is Allan's best-known role, and if you've seen the film, you remember Allan from the perfect and very funny scene in the Hall of Records, where he plays the stuck-up clerk who tells Jack Nicholson that this is not a lending library. Allan worked on several other films during the era, starting with Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider follow-up The Last Movie, and then appearing in films like Mother JUGS Speed by Peter Yates, alongside actors like Harvey Keitel and Raquel Welch, POSSE by and with Kirk Douglas, Rocky II by and with Sylvester Stallone, and also in the Chinatown sequel, The Two Jakes, directed by Jack Nicholson, where he appears as another snooty clerk. In our conversation, Allan shares his memories of the Chinatown shoot and his other appearances as an actor, and he provides a captivating glimpse of the era itself, including a run-in with Charles Manson. The Chinatown interviews were conducted in connection with our German-language podcast Lichtspielplatz, so if you speak German, please visit www.lichtspielplatz.at and check out episode number 56, which features an in-depth discussion of Polanski's film. Also, make sure to listen to Talking Pictures episodes number 19 and 21, in which I talk to Chinatown assistant director Hawk Koch and to editing expert Bobby Osteen, the wife of late Chinatown editor Sam Osteen. If you enjoy my conversation with Allan Warnick, please visit talkingpicturespodcast.com to check out our other interviews and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. So without any further ado, here is Allan Warnick recalling how he became an actor.
Well, I've always been interested in movies. A good friend of mine in high school, David Anson, who went on to become the senior editor of Newsweek magazine, which ended a few years ago, and went on to make the selections for LA Film Festival and Palm Springs Film Festival. He's there now. We went to movies all the time, and it was early 60s, so it was a good time to be going to the movies, and we saw all the, the Truffaut and the Fellini and all the things that I guess you'd consider it the new wave of French and Italian cinema. I went to Beverly Hills High School, which was kind of the center of, most everybody in the area was connected with the film business in one way or another. So there was that exposure. A lot of people had screening rooms, and which was kind of unusual at the time. And, I was very, when I discovered Roman's films, I was very keen on those. They were just a wonderful new vision to me. So that's how it kind of began. And I hadn't really thought about being involved in anything more than a spectator. And then there was a magazine that was more local than, although I heard it was international. It didn't live too terribly long. It was called Cinema Magazine, and it was published in Beverly Hills. And I knew the editor. His uncle was the publisher, who I also knew. And they were, there was a movie being put together called The Last Movie that Dennis Hopper did in Peru. And a bunch of people I knew were going down to do that movie. So I spoke to the editor, who became a film director. His name is Curtis Hanson. He did, I forget that movie. It was noir and it did quite well. Maybe LA Confidential.
Yeah, LA Confidential.
Yes, right. So this was prior to that, and he was very keen on movies. And I told him I'd like to go to Peru and do a story on this movie. And so he said, sure. And so I flew down. It was in Machu Picchu, which is very high up. And that was the first time I spent any time on a film, and I knew Dennis Hopper, and I said to him, well, because so many of my friends were in the movie, I said, I think I should be in this. He said, well, you are. And so um, there was sort of no script at that time. I mean, it was just largely because we were at such a high altitude, kind of whoever showed up on the set worked that day. And a lot of the guys who were big drinkers, um, there's this drink called pisco, which is a national drink of Peru, and they would all get drunk that night, and some of them just wouldn't make it to work. So whoever made it to work was in the movie, and it was great fun. Sam Fuller was in the movie, the director, and I played his assistant. And Sam, who even then, which was many years before he died, treated me as if I was his assistant. He told me what time to wake him up. And, it was because it was a movie within a movie. And it was very funny. Lots of great people. Sylvia Miles and I were great chums. She was in Midnight Cowboy. She made a big impression there. And Chris Christopherson, that was the beginning of his career. All his songs had just become well known, and he was there. It was his first job. And so it was a great bunch of people. We had a lot of fun. And then when I came back to Los Angeles, I thought, well, I should do this. So I got an agent, and I started to do some commercials. And this was, I don't know how far before Chinatown. I kind of lose track. But I was a friend of Jack's, and he would let me read the script of whatever film he was going to do next to see if there was something for me. So I read Chinatown. I thought it was great. And I was a little disappointed because the only thing that seemed fine for me was the scene in the Hall of Records, which was such a small scene, I thought. And so he said, yeah, I agree. That's what I was thinking of for you. So I went down to the set one day, and Jack was walking in to start to shoot, and Roman was coming the other way. And he stopped and said, I had met Roman a few times at parties and things, and was actually he had been married in London, but he had another wedding reception in Los Angeles that I went to with my good friend Peggy Lipton, who was a friend of Sharon's. And he said, what do you think about Alf for the Hall of Records? And at that time, I mean, it was, most people had long hair. My hair was down to my shoulders, and Roman and I are the same height. And he just came up to me, pulled my hair back, and just looked into my face, and he said, "Yes, he's perfect." And that was that. And that's what I loved about Roman. He didn't dick around. I mean, if he thought someone was right, he didn't have to do 20 readings or see a bunch of other people. He had an idea, a concept, and if you fit the concept, then you had the job. So that's how that happened. And when the day that first they cut off all my hair. And at that time, if you had really short hair, you were looked on as either someone who was in the army or as if you were from another planet, I mean, it was just so odd to go into a market or something. And I'm still thinking of myself as a person with long hair, even though it's short. But people kind of look at you like, why do you have that haircut? It was a very bizarre feeling. The day I shot, it was the end of the film, and I was working. Harry Dean Stanton, who didn't appear in the film, was working in the morning. He was a friend of Jack's as well. And Harry Dean played a scene that was not in the movie and was kind of missed. He played, he was the pilot flying Jack to Catalina.
Mm-hmm.
As you may recall, Jack is suddenly in Catalina, and it's sort of like, well, how did he get there? What's that connection? Did I miss something? Well, Harry Dean was pissed off because he thought he should have had a bigger part. And so rather than learn his lines, he didn't learn his lines. And Roman has no patience for that. He does quick takes and on to the next. And at this point, if he were able to finish the film that day, everybody would get, because it was under budget, everyone would get big bonuses, the principals. And so to start the day working with Harry Dean, and Harry Dean was hungover and unapologetic, just sort of, so it created a bad sort of setup. So I heard about this. Howard Koch was a good friend of mine. When I arrived, he said, "Faye isn't working today. I have her dressing room for you." And they treated me so well. And he said, Harry Dean really fucked up and the mood is not great. So I hope you're ready.
It's quite a confidence booster, right?
Yes, it just made me feel very comfortable. And so, the first time I had a glimpse of the set, but that whole Hall of Records was actually built. As authentic as it looks, it wasn't in a building, it was all on the stage. And I just was getting comfortable behind the desk, and Roman was getting ready, and Jack and I were hanging out, and we did a rehearsal, a brief rehearsal, and I didn't, as it was just a walkthrough, I didn't do any of the things, or I didn't get as into character as I did when we shot. So I noticed that Bob Evans was there, who was the head of the studio at the time. Angelica Houston was there, who was a friend and was also involved with Jack at the time. Everyone had come down to watch because it was the last sequence. So we did the first take, and it was really good. I think that was the one they used, and Jack was very funny because, he's an actor and a great actor, but as an actor, of course, in any scene, he's a little not competitive, but he said to me after the scene, "You didn't do any of those things in the run-through, Al. Some of the stuff I did, looking for the pencil, stuff like that." So he was greatly relieved that it wasn't another Harry Dean thing, because there was this sort of view of, oh, great, another friend of Jack. This could be a nightmare. And we, it all went fairly quickly, and everyone was very happy. We finished before the end of the day, and everybody got their bonuses, and it turned out well. But when I left that day, because who knew at that time Chinatown would become what it has become? I was kind of depressed. My thinking was, oh, I got my hair cut off. This little scene, who's ever going to see this movie? Little did I know that for the next 15, 20 years, I would be called on job interviews because of that scene. Because even though it wasn't hugely popular at the time, it seemed as if everyone had seen the movie, and for some reason, everyone remembered my scene. And when I was Jack would have screenings of his movies, and I had met him way before Cuckoo's Nest, before he, became a big star. So we were friends from before him being Jack Nicholson. And we both walked out of the screening at the same time to go to the men's room. And he said to me, yours is the only scene in the movie that gets a big laugh. I said, really? He said, yeah. And so it was a good experience. All in all, it's through the years, it's nice to know that you're a part of something that is a film classic, that is of high quality, that was a great experience. And, my feeling is I've worked with other people on other jobs, nothing of that caliber in terms of quality or writing or any of that. And my feeling is, I've been a part of a great piece of film history, and that's a nice thing to have done.
Mm-hmm. Do people recognize you from that scene? Do people approach you on the street and say, "Hey, you're that guy"?
No, because so much time has passed, and they did early on around town, around Beverly Hills. People would stop me and say, "Oh, that was so great," or but more often I would get a call from someone who said, I saw I didn't know you were in Chinatown. I mean, this is as recent as a few weeks ago, and so much time has passed. And I heard your voice from the other room, and I came in, and you were so great in that scene. It was so good to see you. And oddly enough, I think I look quite different from what I looked like in the early 70s, but I recognize people that I haven't seen in 50 years, like from high school. No matter how much they've changed, I can see, because I'm very visual, that person underneath that layer of fat or lines or whatever. So if I'm walking down the street and I see someone I haven't seen in 50 years, I'll say, "Oh, hi, Chuck, how's it going?" And they immediately recognize me for some reason,
Mm-hmm.
So that's always been the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you have a very distinctive face. You were talking about the difference with the hairstyle, and I've seen you in your like in the last movie, for example, before you got the short hair. And I think
Mhm.
just with your features, you're immediately recognizable. And then through Chinatown and the other roles that you did, just if it's
So you saw the last
yeah, I've
movie?
seen it.
You're one of 10 people. Ironic part is, you probably know this because you're such a film nerd. The movie went to Venice and it got the Golden Palm that year, and then it went to New York, and there were great expectations. And it was the same year as the Last Picture Show, and of course, the Last Picture Show got all the attention, and it opened to the worst reviews of any movie that had been seen for a long time because it was simply unintelligible. Um, what happened was Dennis, um, there was the movie within the movie that took the first part, and that was really kind of more interesting in many ways than the rest of it, because the rest of it just involved him and this girl wandering around, and it didn't make a great deal of sense. And at that time, cocaine was very popular, probably still is for many people, but Dennis would send out, because of course you couldn't open a film tin because it would expose the film. So Dennis would send cocaine out in some of the film tins. So he would have enough coke to get through the editing period. So he got into the editing room with all this coke and spent a year, just assembling something that meant something to him, but basically to nobody else. And one of the moments that kind of changed everything on the location were in Machu Picchu and above. I mean, not Machu Picchu. We're in Cusco. This was at a time when they'd seen few, never mind people from America, but few white people. It was the first time a movie had been shot. They just didn't understand. It was very unique to them. So what happened was, and they were happy to have us for the attention and publicity. We borrowed the horse for the Western sequence where someone, I don't think it was Dennis, was riding through town and they blow up the bank. So we got the horse of the chief of police, and whoever was doing the blowing up the bank wasn't really good at judging how much explosive to use. So it was a huge explosion. The horse took off, fell over the cliff, and had to be shot.
Oh.
So, and this is the chief of police's horse. So suddenly we were not extremely popular. So We knew that, you know, they were going to be looking for ways to get rid of us, and that they would be searching our room. So at the end of the day, Dennis had a pickup truck. Everybody would line up with their drugs, give them to Dennis. He'd lock them in the truck for the night. And then the next day when they'd come to work, he'd give everybody's drugs back. But they, you know, they searched the rooms, and we were not popular after that. But you know, it was great fun. I mean, it was such a trip. It was a month, and then some people went down the Amazon after and got lost, and you know, people would go to Machu Picchu and take acid, and a couple of people wouldn't turn up for a couple of days. One day, it was Laszlo Kovacs on that film, wasn't it? Wasn't it Laszlo? Yeah. It was our day off, so we all decided to take a little acid on this hillside, and Laszlo was shooting that. I don't think that ended up in anything, but it was a very informal situation. So how was that?
It's interesting because it seems to be such a different way of filmmaking compared to nowadays. It's the kind of production I think that is only possible in the 70s, it seems.
Oh, absolutely. What happened, the reason it came about was it was just after Easy Rider. So the studio figured, because they were so surprised at what happened with Easy Rider, well, let's give Jack and Peter and Dennis each $1 million and let them make a movie, and maybe something will come of it. So they all went off and did their movies, and nothing really happened. I mean, you know, Jack did a basketball movie of some kind, and that's just sort of how things went. Everything was a bit of a crapshoot. You know, well, let's try this, let's try that. And then, you know, of course, it became much more committee and money people and all of that. It's very casual.
Mm. It's interesting that this is your first experience in the movie business. This is such an unusual production and such an unusual film that brought you into the world of movies.
Yeah. It got a little more constrained after that, you know, and it was never as interesting as that again, because the material was never as good. You know, when you start off in something that has such a strong story. I mean, not I was thinking of Chinatown, but Chinatown was one of the earlier things that I did. And once you can see that there is great quality, you know, everything else is just sort of, oh, well, I'll do this. Mm-hmm. You know, it's credit.
How much of that part did you shape on that day that you were there? You do a lot of like little things with a pen that's you're having difficulties writing with a pen, and you do that little sniff with a nose at some point at Jack when he talks to you. And did you improvise those moments?
Yes. Yeah. I didn't. I just wanted to be sure I knew my lines, and I thought when I was in Faye's dressing room, waiting to do the scene, because I was, you know, you're called for a certain time, but all you do is wait around for a while, and they were struggling with Harry Dean, and I was a little nervous, and I thought, you know, if you're not going to have fun doing this, then it's not the right thing to be doing. So I just sort of forgot about, I mean, I just was able to feel less nervous. And the thing about Jack is, I think most actors will tell you, is he makes it very easy. Because when you work with someone who's that good and that at ease, it's infectious. You know, so I wasn't nervous, and Jack wasn't nervous, and I just thought I should have a good time. So I didn't even think about the things I did. Really, I didn't prepare them in any way. They just came to me at the moment. Mm-hmm. So it worked out well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's such a perfect little scene, I think, and in all of the details. And you're right when you say that, well, it always gets a huge laugh, that scene. I don't think it's the only one. There are other scenes, like when Jack Nicholson is telling that the Chinaman joke, for example, at the beginning of the movie. But yeah, your scene does get a really good reaction from audiences.
Yeah, I like that. That was fun. That was good. And then after that, you know, whenever I'd go on, I did commercials too and other things. Whenever I'd go out on a call, you know, everyone just sort of perked up when either they knew that I'd done that scene, or they realized in the midst of a casting thing that that was why they had called me, that, you know, oh, that scene was so great. And so I finally realized that it wasn't just a scene that would be forgotten. And Roman even said at one time, it was my 30th birthday. I was in Rome at Roman's, and Jack was there, and Warren Beatty was there, and it was just a lot of people and a lot of fun. And they gave me this nice surprise birthday party. And Roman said, you know, I think your scene may be my favorite scene in the movie. I really love that scene, and everybody that's seen it that I've ever seen it with or talks to me about the movie just thought that was such a great scene, which was nice.
Wow.
I wanted to work with him again. The opportunity didn't come up. An interesting moment, you know, when Roman was about to leave the States because it became apparent for a number of reasons that the judge was going to send him to prison for a long time period. Did you read the book on that came out in the last couple of years on the making of Chinatown?
By the book by Sam Wasson, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes,
actually,
very.
I have it right here. This one, you mean?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. It's a great book and very accurate in so many ways. Roman and I had a mutual friend named Stefan, Polish. He had known him from Poland. He was a ballet master, and I took ballet for like 12 years or so. So Roman knew he was going to split, but it was days before. And Stefan said to me, you know, I thought it'd be good for Roman just to come and take a ballet class. So I want you just to get his mind off things. And Roman is so focused and he can get into anything. So he said, I want you to take it with him, make him feel more comfortable. This was, you know, after Chinatown. So Roman came, and he was dodging the paparazzi all the time. Roman came, nobody saw him. And it was just so interesting. You know, he was not particularly good, but he was, you know, he was just completely present. I mean, this is what we were doing. We were taking this ballet class. And I just thought in retrospect, it was so interesting. You know, we had this lovely moment together before he left the country for good. And looking back on it, it's such a unique visual, you know. And then I didn't see him till years later when he was getting ready to do a pirate movie, which never came together. And I told him I'd like to see about maybe working on that film. And the only way I can place it in time is the Concorde was still flying. And part of my incentive was I was going to fly back from Paris to New York on the Concorde, which was a treat. I had no idea, of course, as no one did, that they would quickly end the Concorde flights. So I saw Roman and his new wife, and it was great to see him. And he was, you know, very excited about this next project. And, you know, we're still in touch periodically. But it's a pity. I mean, he did good work after Chinatown. Tess was a wonderful movie. But what his career could have been if he hadn't been blackballed in that way. You know, to this day, it's just so, I mean, it's really the main reason he hasn't been able to come back is just a vendetta of the LA police, because they were pissed and embarrassed that he got away. So 50 years later or so, they're still, no, you can't come back. And of course, at this point, he'd have no interest. Such a strange time.
Yeah. And then many years later, you were brought back to appear in the scene of the sequel of Chinatown. I was wondering how that came together. Was that through your friendship with Jack Nicholson?
No, it was, interestingly, it was, I knew they were getting ready to do that. I was at a market in Los Angeles and I ran into Robert Towne, who was writing it at the time. He said, we just chatted for a moment. He said, oh, I liked the way it worked out so well in Chinatown. I've written a scene for you in the new movie. So, to Jake. So I said, oh, that's great. So I wondered, what it might be, and didn't hear anything for some time. And then, I was simply cast and had to go, to the wardrobe and all that. And I had to get fitted for this thing they put in my mouth to keep my jaw wired shut, which to affect the way I spoke, of course. So that was a great help, actually, because it gave you something to work with. And I remember just, driving up to Ventura to shoot that day. And it's always fun to work with Jack. I mean, one of the things I love about the way he worked as a director, which I'd never encountered before, but other people apparently do this sometimes. It's so odd when you're doing a movie and you're preparing for a scene that they then yell action. It's like fire. and you're in character and you're ready to go, but it's annoying. So what Jack does is he tells the camera to roll at some point that you never really know when that is, and he just is having a conversation with you, and then we just fall into the dialogue of the scene. And it's so sensible. I thought, why doesn't everybody do this? It just makes it so much more natural. The stepping into it because you're there already. So that was great fun. I did that. We didn't do too many takes of that. It was a good day, a good shoot. So, I had read the script and, I thought, well, I don't know. And it was only kind of halfway there. And I thought, perhaps it will become more interesting. But then seeing it, I thought, oh no, this is not going to fly. Because, of course, there are the expectations after Chinatown. And then there's this movie. And I of course, couldn't be objective because I'd been in Chinatown and my thinking just wasn't, no one's going to bother with this and it's going to be bad. But it was still a good time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, and I was very pleased that Bob thought of, writing me in again. It isn't essentially, I don't think I meant to be the same character. I just think it's meant to be a reference for those who have seen Chinatown. And I'm sure that most people who got to Two Jakes had seen Chinatown and were there for that reason. Yeah. And I think I mentioned to you, I don't know, I think a big part of the reason that Chinatown, well, timing is everything, that Chinatown didn't get the recognition it should have, is it was released the same time as The Godfather. And The Godfather got all the Academy Awards, and Chinatown only got, ironically, the award for a screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Town was still pissed off because Roman changed the ending.
definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the two Jakes then went up against The Godfather 3, which is in a
Yeah,
nice kind of symmetry, I guess.
exactly. Yes.
But yeah, I actually saw you as the same character. I mean, I think it's not. I think you have a name. The character has a name in the credits of the two Jakes, and in Chinatown, it just says like Hall of Records clerk or something like that. But to me, you're
Right.
the same character. I was telling somebody about how you appear in both movies, and I just said, well, he hasn't
Oh,
gotten friendlier in 16 years.
yeah, it was fun to, and easy for me to be that particular person. That was cool. And when I look back on, I mean, I've only seen Chinatown maybe 3 or 4 times, but um, sometimes it's on TV and I'll catch my scene, and it's so interesting to see yourself that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember one of my main thoughts when I was um, just about to go on to shoot the scene. Roman looked at me and he said, because I'm young. I was young and my skin was really good. He said, "Your skin, it is too good. Go back to the dressing room. Tell them to put pimples on." And I said, "Oh fuck! Not only do I have no hair, I have to look like shit." So it was, I just thought this close-up was going to be a nightmare. But it was right for the character. I totally understood. It was very fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just the contrast between Nicholson and you is great in that scene, and I think those little details sort of sharpen that contrast and make it a little bit more funny.
Yes, I agree. Well, that's what Roman was so good at, those kind of subtle. I mean, nothing escaped his vision. Nothing. There was no part of the frame that he hadn't examined. And you see that so rarely, I think.
So you did do quite a number of other films where you had small parts, but with very people who are or who became very famous, like
Oh, yeah.
the Kirk Douglas Western, for example, Posse. You're in that one. Do you remember that one?
Yeah. Well, of course, I was there a month, it seems, in old Tucson, which was a Western town that was used a lot for Western settings. I remember that because Kirk was such a pain in the ass. he's first and foremost an actor, and he wants a great deal of attention. He had a lot in common with Stallone. And when I met him, it was interesting because I was up for one part that I didn't really like that much, but I thought doing the station master would be much more interesting, who was described as this old guy. And so when I met with Kirk, I just said, it seems to me that given the time period, the station master wouldn't be an old guy because of the responsibilities involved and because people didn't live that long. You're not going to have some old guy running the station. And so he said, "Oh, that's an interesting thought. Let me think about that." So he called me back in. He said he wanted me to do that part. And, I mean, it never occurred to me at the time that was kind of an unusual opportunity, to do what I wanted to do. And then I said, I was really kind of pushing it. I had a meeting with, there's this thing on movies that I always notice. Either the wardrobe is wonderful and it looks lived in and the characters look appropriate, or the wardrobe is costumes of the period. And you can immediately spot a costume picture because the clothes haven't been worn since they were put on for the first time for that shot. The wigs are bad, things are just out of whack. So I met with the wardrobe person, and of course on Chinatown, we had Anthea Silbert, who was one of the great uh, costume designers. She went on to production, and uh, so I said to Kirk, I said, I worked with Anthea Silbert on Chinatown, and we have such a great rapport, and she's so good at wardrobe. I'd like her to do my clothes for this movie. And he said, really? I said, yeah, she's fine with it. She's down at Western costume all the time. He said, all right. So, he was starting to maybe see that I might be more trouble than I was worth. Um, and Posse was such a bad movie. It was such a dated kind of script. And Kirk was Kirk Douglas, and he was very famous, and he did a couple of good movies. But a Kirk Douglas movie was basically Kirk Douglas with his, shoving his cleft in your face. He was just this guy, although he did some good work. So on the movie, there's just so much waiting around. But there were some very interesting people on the set, and he would say things to me like, I'd be waiting for a close-up. Oh, actually, the thing I remember most is, did you see the movie?
Mm-hmm.
No, you
yes,
did? Okay. You remember the sequence where I had to run up the water tower?
Yeah, with the burning train that comes into the station, yeah.
Yeah. So I said to Kirk, I said, what's going to prevent me from being burned alive in this sequence? Oh, don't worry about a thing. And so, I was like, well, here, train's getting ready to come. I have to do this thing. And I couldn't think of a way out of it other than to say, I really don't think I'm going to do this because it's terrifying. And it was, the heat from the train, and he had me do it 2 or 3 times. But, he developed this, he treated me a bit like I was his kid. And it would be like, okay, now, I want you to walk up into this close-up. I don't even know why I'm giving you this close-up. That was sort of this general attitude, which is such a good setup for a close-up, right? And he was like that throughout, just sort of slightly pissed off. And he was that way with so many people. But I just remember one day I wanted to ask him something, and I went into his dressing room, and he was with an eyebrow pencil drawing in his cleft so it looked even more pronounced. His pants were around his ankles, and he was getting what he said was a B12 injection. And I thought, it's so funny. This guy who looks so muscular and forbidding has the skinniest legs I've ever seen in my life. That's one of my favorite images of him. And I don't think, certain movies that just were such a drag to work on, although I had really fun times on that too. I would get checks for years for residuals because they would be released and re-released on television. Rocky 3, I think. I didn't even do anything on that movie. I still get checks for that.
Really?
It's 100. Yeah. They're not much, but it's just, then I think of actors who have done masses of movies and had big roles who can literally live off their royalties indefinitely.
Yeah, I've seen you in Rocky 2, the scene where he shoots the commercial, and you put makeup on him, and then you say finito.
Yes. Right. I watched that movie just past my scene and then stopped, because at that point I just, I never liked him as an actor. I thought he was just, he shouldn't have cast himself in his own films. I mean, I know he became a great big star and still works in movies, but I just never liked his persona. And he was, I think the only reason he gave me the job, when I went to meet him, I had a book of, pictures from various things. And he thought I reminded him a lot of him, that I looked a lot like him at the time, which was very strange. So, all right, that's a good enough reason to give me a job. But then it was raining all the time. We were on this set, and he was just so far behind. And you're just sitting around for days waiting to do a dumb scene in a dumb movie. And I was just sort of not terribly grateful to have the job. And my energy was not. See, a lot of actors hang out on set all the time to either they're interested, which I doubt, because if you're not working, why would you be interested unless it was a great director, a great scene, or just because they sort of feel the director or the star expects you to be there. Well, I had a nice dressing room and I had a good book, so I never showed up until my scene was ready. And I think he was a bit annoyed with that. Aren't I interesting enough to for you to watch me work? And he's in this absurd little costume. And it's so unlike anything in reality. And I'm just thinking, oh, this is as good as it gets after Chinatown. So my energy was very, let's just get this out of the way. So we just kind of ignored each other. And when these movies went on to make all this money, I just thought, what a poor reflection of taste in America that they would like this. What can I say?
Yeah, times have certainly changed over the years.
Yeah. Oh God, yes.
Now, one of the movies that you did, that's I think one of your biggest roles that you played, Mother JUGS Speed by Peter Yates, where you're actually part of that ensemble and you're in quite a few scenes interacting with everybody else.
Good fun. Peter Yates wasn't much of a director. I don't think he ever gave me any direction that I recall. There were a lot of people, Cosby and Raquel and Harvey Keitel, who was just sort of, who's this guy? But I became very close friends with Dick Butkus, who was my partner in the movie. And he was a very famous football player. And I had no interest in football, just, a bunch of guys bashing each other. So when I met Dick, he was, guys just worshipped him. If we went out to dinner or something, because we spent a lot of time together, guys would come up for autographs. They just, and then want to talk about some play and some game. And he was very polite. And the first thing I said to him when I met him was, I've never seen a whole football game, so I don't have that to talk to you about. And he was just so relieved, and we were so different from each other that it was fun to hang out. And he was very Catholic. He had 3 kids, and he's still alive. I have to be careful what I say. I try to be kind when people are alive. But I adored him. We had a great time. In fact, I was living in Malibu at the time. He was living in Florida. And not long after that, he moved the family out to Malibu because he liked it so much. And we were just great buddies. So that was the good part, because we just hung out together, Raquel surprised me because she was so tiny and so fragile. And she always photographed so big. She photographed so well. She was just this tiny little creature and seemed tense. She just seemed really tense all the time. And there wasn't an inkling of a sense of humor of any kind. Nice enough, but I thought, what a drag to be her. I was just with it. Cosby was just Cosby. The old Cosby before.
Before we knew what was actually going on.
Keitel was just serious and friendly enough. And Larry Hagman was on that too. I quite liked. He lived near me in Malibu. Yeah, it was an amazing group of people, which I think was why it got made. They just got very good. Got lucky. I think it was probably just a time when there was money enough for everyone and no one had anything better to do, because the plot was pretty lame. But that was a fun one. No one ever really saw Peter Yates much. He was mainly in his trailer talking with people. I don't remember ever being directed in that movie, other than to say, well, you're over here and you're over there. And he didn't strike me as being, I don't even remember what movies he'd done. I think he got to direct that movie because he'd, which is often the case, had a successful movie prior to that, whatever that might have been. But that was enjoyable. That was fun.
Mm-hmm. And then after a while, you didn't make any movies anymore. The last ones are around 1980, 1981, and then there's a huge break before the Two Jakes comes in, and then the last one you did, Hold Me, Thrill Me, Kiss Me, which is another really funny part in a movie that's not so funny, I think, but it's a nice little scene in that movie.
I just Joel, who directed it and wrote it, was a friend at the time, and so he asked me to do that. I said sure. So it was my idea to fall into the grave. It was a dumb little scene, but I thought that made it interesting. And I was just surprised when I read the script that he was able to get the money to do it. I mean, but he got very lucky. He got, wasn't it Helen Mirren? Yeah, it was Helen Mirren. And, you know, there's certain actors who you pay what they ask, and if they're not working, they'll show up. I think two good examples of that in their later work in terms of movie stars are Pacino and De Niro, because here they had this, each of them, this body of work which was so respectable and so much quality, and then they started doing this crap, and Pacino in particular became such a caricature of himself. You know, every movie you could count on him just yell and scream. And I thought, you just really have to block out everything they've done after a certain date and just think about their earlier stuff. And there are certain actors who you pay their price, even if the script is garbage, they show up. If they don't have a better job to do, they get paid. And the attitude is, no one's going to see this thing anyway, so what does it matter? And, you know, her quality is always visible. There was not much really for her to do in that movie, but he just got really lucky. And then he got lucky again in a movie that he did. He managed to get that actor who was very popular for a while, Clive Owen, for a movie. But I think part of it was his partner named Travis was very good at, he was sort of the producer, at getting money and getting people together. He was very charming, but not a lot of talent there, just sort of disappeared after that. And the thing is that, you know, you can go out on 20 auditions and have numerous callbacks. And if you get, say, one job out of 20, you're doing fantastically well. I did a bunch of commercials and found that to be true, and as well. And auditions are a drag. You know, when I started out, an audition meant meeting with the director, and then, you know, quickly you would know or not. And then it became, well, there's this casting director. So you go and you do put things on film for the casting director. And the casting director is a frustrated person who thinks they should be directing, you know? And the whole process became so lame. You know, every job I got, it was because the director knew, like with Roman, that I was right for the part. They didn't have to see 47 takes or have 50 takes. So, you know, like with Chinatown and the two Jakes, where the parts were written for me, I just decided I don't need this. You know, it's not worth the time and energy for me. There are more interesting things to do. So my attitude since then has been, someone wants me for something, they can reach me. I'm not that, I love doing it, but I don't love what you have to do to get it now. I mean, essentially, if you want to be a working actor, you have to have perseverance, essentially. We see so many people on film who are really rather mediocre, and we ask ourselves, why are they there? Well, they just kept coming back for more. They just ignored the rejection. They just kept coming back for more, and so they're there. And that's, I mean, when we see truly talented people working, it's amazing that they have been able, with their level of sensitivity and talent, to persevere. Well, that's my take anyway. So, you know, I still have a few years, 20 or 30 maybe, and so maybe in that time I'll do something else, have a late bloom.
Well, that would be great. I would love to see that. What have you been doing after you gave up acting?
Well, for a period, I did a lot of interior design. My work was published in Architectural Digest. I just sort of fell into it. A good friend of mine, China Phillips, there was a group called Wilson Phillips. They were very popular. And I knew them since they were children, because China was the daughter of Michelle Phillips, who was an old friend. And the Wilson girls were Brian Wilson's daughters. So this was when they first became famous with their big hits. And I don't know if it was true in Europe, but so they had new money, and China got a place, and she said, look, I'm going on the road for a year. You have great taste, just make it nice. So that's an ideal situation. It's like you don't have somebody who thinks they have taste coming up with very bad ideas, which is usually the case. So I just did it. I mean, I always saw everything, when you look in a room, as an empty canvas. So you just fill it. And I had a natural sense of balance and composition and color and all that. So I did that. But then the only problem with that is people. People and their bad ideas. And the more money people have, the more they think they know it should be. So then you have to spend half your time persuading them, no, that doesn't work there. Or you can have that if you want, but try and tell them nicely, it's just going to fuck up the room. So I stopped doing that at a point, and I found, I would buy a house and I would make it perfect. And then 5 or 6 years later, I wanted a new empty canvas. So I would sell the house, and as a result, make much more money than I paid for it and put into it. And so I thought, well, this is nice. You get to design and you don't have to talk to people. So I did that and did a lot of traveling all over the world. I've been, I think the only places I haven't been is Antarctica and the Arctic, all of South America and Europe and Scandinavia and Asia and Malaysia and everywhere, just exploring. And then I've been coming to Hawaii since I was a teenager, and love it here. So I always thought, if the occasion arose, I could get something and look at the sea. It would be lovely. So I got this 10 years ago. And then, I'd always lived in Los Angeles, except for a couple of years in England. And it never occurred to me to live somewhere else. But suddenly I realized when my parents were in their 90s, the only reason I'm here is because they're still alive. Let's get out of here. So I moved to Palm Springs. I'd come in to visit my parents every 6 weeks. And whenever I'd come to visit, I'd think, how did I manage to stay here so long? It was such a great place to grow up. I mean, it was a wonderful place to grow up. But it just, in the end, became like so many other cities, too crowded. And the more people you have together in a place, the less attractive it becomes. People are stressed out and not connected, and the more concentration of people, the more people want to put a wall around themselves, both figuratively and literally. So it was a great relief to find myself in what seemed a small town at the time, but then I stumbled upon Sedona about 6 years ago, which is a fabulous place up in the mountains. In fact, they're just having their film festival next week. And so I've got that place, and now I'm thinking, even because America is so fucked up, that I'm very interested in New Zealand. I spent some time there. It's very difficult to get into for various reasons, good reasons. They want to keep people out, especially foreigners who want to come in and buy up all the land. But I'm looking at distancing myself more and more from the mainland of the United States, because it's not moving in a particularly good direction. So, but in the meantime, if you're fortunate enough to, I just want everything to be beautiful, whatever direction you're looking in. And that can be done. I mean, geography is destiny. You pick a place in nature that is beautiful, and you control, if you can, your exposure to people. I see many more trees than people on a daily basis. I mean, I can go days without seeing people except for a quick trip to Whole Foods or something like that. So, I'm fortunate in that way. It's pretty cool. I read a lot. I've taken up pottery during the pandemic, which I quite like. I do that every week. And, I stay in touch with, I have friends from high school that I'm in touch with. So I think it's important to have people who have known you throughout your life. It's especially if they happen to still be alive. So it keeps me busy.
Yeah, those are the really strong, very strong friendships, I think, those that have been going on for decades. Even when you haven't seen people for quite a while, I mean, it happens when you live in different countries and everything, but the people you knew 20 or 30 years ago, that's a very special bond, I think.
Oh, of course. And you can pick up as if your conversation dropped off just yesterday. I mean, there's that through line. And it's especially comforting when people knew you at various stages of your life and knew them. And in many ways, it's like, particularly because, as they say, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there. There's so many people that I still know who came through that whole time period. And it seems like 3 or 4 of us together make up one whole memory, because you see people and they remind you of something that's so vivid to them, and you're trying to piece it together, or you run into someone on the street and you look at them and you're thinking, oh yeah, we spent so much time together. Did we fuck? If you're trying to put that moment together. Well, yeah, it's nice to have that.
Are you still in touch with the people you worked on Did you work with on the movies?
Well, you know, I haven't been in touch with Jack in a while. Jack kind of has withdrawn a bit. He, you know, he used to be much more active, getting out and playing golf, but since it seems he's really stopped making movies, I kept thinking he would keep going. I mean, he was even some of the later movies which weren't quite the quality. I mean, he has such a great history of film, but he's just put on a huge amount of weight. Doesn't get the exercise he used to get, and you know, I'm not quite sure what's going on with him. I don't know any people who see him. You know, it's so interesting. He still lives in the same house that he's had for 50 or 60 years. It's a teeny house, small little. I mean, relatively, when you think of what movie stars have, but what he did do, it was. It's down a long gate off Mulholland, and it's got a big gate on it. And Brando was his only neighbor, which was great. And Brando was off this way, Jack was off this way, up on a hill. And Jack just bought the only two houses next to him, so he would have complete privacy. So, you know, he has sort of uses them as guest houses and stuff. But to have such a teeny little bedroom and bathroom and such a small little house. He's got an amazing art collection. I mean, most of it is just stored at another house up the coast because there's no room for it. But the collection of art is huge. I mean, all through his early career, he started collecting very valuable pieces. But it just seems odd that if you have this great art, you would want to be in a place where you could be looking at it all the time. But he's a very loyal person. I mean, he has the same phone number. If I called him today, you know, I know he'd take my call. He's just been a good friend since my early 20s. And some people are not consistent in that way. But let me see, other people. I don't see Dick Butkus that much. Well, I'm not in California anymore, and he had heart bypass and things like that. No, Faye, I remember driving Faye home from the set one day, and she just asked me for a ride. I had this little yellow car with a red top, and it was called a Seata, and it looked a lot like those old MGs. So I drove her home. She asked me to come in, and we were just chatting briefly. Then she got a call, and I was just wandering around the house, and I walked into her bedroom, and it was the most bizarre thing. She had this big bed frame, you know, that you would put a mattress on, but there was no mattress. There was nothing. It was just empty. And I thought, well, where does she sleep? Everyone had strange stories about Faye and her odd behavior on set. But, you know, in the end, as they say, it's what you see on film that matters, and no matter what her process was to get it there, she was good when she was good. And then it's so unfortunate that Mommy Dearest sort of ended her career. I mean, everyone's entitled to a bad movie, I should think. I mean, or at least one, but that just sort of did it for her, which is too bad. And then, you know, some actors, especially women, when they get to that certain age where they think, oops, I've got to preserve my look, and they start doing surgery, and it works for some. And then for others, it's like, because you never know until after, and there's no going back. You know? I look at Nicole Kidman, and I should think of her early movies, and she had such a unique beauty. And I mean, of course, she's still beautiful, but she looks kind of frozen.
Mm.
You know, every movie you can sort of see, oh, she decided that there wasn't enough chin, so let's do a little more chin. You know? You're so distracted by that.
Yeah, I think frozen is the perfect word for that, when you see that especially on an actress. And it's such a shame because, I mean, the face is such an important tool for an actor, and if they can't move the face anymore, and it's just this kind of mask that they have, they kind of rob themselves of the expressiveness that they have.
Oh, you know, but if you're looking at your face and it's 3 stories high and all you're focusing on is these crow lines, you say to yourself, oh, well, I'll just do Botox all the time and that will solve that. But then, of course, you're not able to frown.
Yeah.
So it's not the best trade in the world. You know? I mean, you look at someone like, who won the account? Oh, Frances McDormand.
Mm.
I'm not a terribly big fan. I think she's done some wonderful work, but it does get a bit repetitious from my point of view, and her choice of material is questionable. But you know, it seems like she goes out of her way to pick parts where she can just look as bad as possible. And this is someone who probably could look kind of pretty in a certain light. I don't know why I picked on her.
Yeah, she's kind of become known for these very rough characters in a way, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that last movie, it was like, well, all right, I guess that was interesting, but on the whole, if I'd never seen it, my life wouldn't be any less. You know? Strange.
There's one movie which I wanted to ask you about, which I haven't mentioned yet, which is also one of your early ones, and also ones where you have a bigger role, actually, which is Wild Honey, which you did apparently after the last movie. So how did that come about?
How did you come across that? I was, let me see, this must have been 60s or 70s. I think it was, I don't remember when it was, but the producer was a friend of mine, and he told me he was doing this movie. It was, he called it soft porn, I think, or, I mean, it wasn't hardcore. It was, you know, he was very keen on the storyline. And I just said, sure, whatever. And I barely, all I remember is vaguely showing up. It was a period during which everything is a bit hazy. All I really remember about the movie was I think my hair was still long. So it must have been before Chinatown. And I had a T-shirt that I loved that I got to wear in that movie. It had like a star on it or something. And I remember nothing else about it. And I don't even know if it ever came out. I don't know anything about it other than I showed up. I think it's amazing that you came across that. Were you actually able to see a print of it?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Really?
I have a copy of it.
I love that. Wow.
And it's so funny to see you in that movie, since I know you from Chinatown, and the difference is just so great. I mean, like you said, with the hair, you have long hair there, and you play this sort of, well, this cult leader, who is this just very, very counterculture, kind of Charles Manson type in a way. And to see you, yeah, I know you as the kind of very uptight clerk who's very, very rigid about everything, and then see you in that part as a cult leader. That was brilliant.
Oh, that's so funny. I love that. I haven't heard the name of that movie, I think, since I did it, whenever that was. Yeah. Well, that was a very strange. It was very foggy that time. I think it was sort of a period of a great deal of pot smoking. Very hazy. was around the time, as I recall, of the Monterey Pop Festival, and there was so much going on during that time.
Yeah, which I guess makes it a very interesting era. I mean,
Oh, yeah. I mean, you just never knew. I mean, I lived. Terry Melcher was a good friend of mine. He was a record producer. You may have heard his name. He lived in the house that Roman and Sharon lived in, where the murders took place on Cielo. And I lived several blocks away. And he was a good friend of mine. I spent a lot of time with him up at that house. And we traveled a lot all over the world. He produced the Byrds, who was a big group. He did that song, Tambourine Man. His mother was Doris Day, who of course was Doris Day. And one night, he was kind of living with Candice Bergen at the time. And she was working on a movie. I spent the night up there because sometimes you get loaded and it was a winding road down and you just don't leave. And in the middle of the night, he said, "We have to leave." He had a place in Malibu. And he never came back to that house for some reason. And then Roman and Sharon took the house. And I had unfortunately met Manson through Terry and Dennis Wilson, who was in the Beach Boys, a year or so prior to that. And he was very creepy. I didn't like being around him. So, and Dennis was the one who kind of brought him in to meet Terry and said, "Oh, he's got great music, and maybe you would produce him." So Charlie got this idea that maybe Terry was going to help him have this music career. So, cut to, Manson actually found out where I lived because this girl who was driving me crazy, who was following me all over, very rich girl, came to my house one day, and I was in the middle of a project. And I said, "Listen, do me a favor." She had met Charlie as well. And I said, "I'm told Charlie has this lovely ranch. Why don't you go out there for the weekend? Then when you come back, I'll have some time, So off she went. And then she came back a few days later looking slightly deranged. And she said, "Oh, Charlie's out." In those days, to get a divorce, you had to go to Nevada because you could get a quick divorce there. And so she said, "Oh, Charlie's outside with the girls and they're all on acid. And I told them I would come back to the ranch with them, but I'm going to have a miscarriage." So she went into the bathroom. She said, "Tell him I can't come back." And so, this was sort of not an unusual situation. It seemed unusual at the time, but typical of many issues that would arise. So I went out and said hi to Charlie, and the car, it was an old Studebaker, and there were two seats in the front, but in the back, instead of seats, there was just hay. So there were a bunch of girls on acid in the back in all this hay. And I said, "Charlene really wishes she could come back right now, but she has to go back to Reno to finish her divorce." And he said, "Oh, okay, do you have any acid?" I said, "Actually, no." He said, "Okay, well, I'll remember where you live," and drove off. And yes, exactly. So it wasn't long after that she had the miscarriage. She went back to Washington. There were many more chapters of that. And then, the night of the murders, a group of us were leaving the Daisy, which was like the club of the time, the equivalent of the Studio 54 in Los Angeles, only way before. So John Phillips, the Moms and Papas, several of us were walking out at the same time, and we'd all been asked to stop by Roman's because Roman was out of town and Sharon was having some people over. But it was like a weeknight and we didn't go. And then the next day we hear about all the murders and everybody's calling around and trying to find out who was there. And it never occurred to me. I mean, it never occurred to me. I had a couple of other encounters with Charlie when it became clear that that's who it was. It was such an odd feeling to not only know the people who were murdered, but to have had this encounter with the murderer. And I had the FBI visiting on a regular basis for the next year. You know, they'd come around and want to ask questions about a particular time. And, you know, I could remember maybe a season. It was summer. What year was that? I remember summer. He said, and the FBI said, how come all you people can remember a time of year and not remember the year? Which I thought was very funny. So then after they caught Manson, he said, you know, here's a number you can call anytime because some of his people are still out there and we don't know, you know, it was like everybody had security people and all that. So that's when everything kind of changed because up until then, you know, parties at John and Michelle Phillips were just open. I mean, if you heard there was a party, there was no one at the door checking to see if, you know, what your connection was. So from then on, things naturally changed radically. And Charlie's dead, I think. So I think he died in prison. Yeah, that was an odd time.
I can't even imagine what that's like to, I don't know, to have come into contact with such a circle, and then in retrospect, you sort of you realize the seriousness of that, and the also how lucky you were that you weren't deeper in those circles.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it was, and it was just so bizarre. And the thing that strikes me as particularly interesting is all these years later, people with all the murders that have taken place and all the similar situations, they still remember the Manson thing. I mean, people who are too young to have even been born at that time, the name resonates. I find it to be, I guess it's just the way some things stick, you know. Very strange.
Yeah, I think it sort of represents something. I think Sam Wasson actually says that in his book, that there are actually two dates where the 60s ended, and or a couple of occasions where the 60s ended, and that was in 1968 after the assassination of Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King, and then in 69 with the Manson murders. That's where the 60s ended, period. That's and I think because it symbolizes such a sort of the dark side of that era, I think that's why it's become such a reference point.
Yes, yeah, yes, I agree completely. Very, very strange. Well, the good news is to have lived through all that, you know, and progressively. I mean, the 60s did sort of linger into the 70s in many ways, but then, you know, easing into the early 80s and the whole AIDS thing and the impact of that, and you know the presidents we've had since then, Reagan, who was such, you know, Reagan got off so easy. I mean, Saint Ronnie. I mean, here's a man who would not utter the word AIDS till his friend Rock Hudson got sick, and so then, you know, all these people died because he would not accept the fact that it was an issue except for those people. And he was totally homophobic. Both his son, Ron Jr., and I had the same ballet class. We had the same ballet master. And I remember one day, Nancy dragged Ronnie to come and watch her class because he wanted nothing to do with anything that was at all unmasculine. And I remember Ron sitting there, Ronnie, watching the class with this sort of pinched look on his face and his orange hair and the Secret Service outside the door. And he never once glanced at his son, just was looking around, couldn't wait to leave. And then Nancy said, let's go. And, this is the creep who became president. We had a funny moment. I was growing a lot of pot in my backyard, and I wanted to get rid of some plants. There were too many. So Ron Jr. came over one day, and I said, look, I'll give you a bunch of these plants. So stuffing them in his trunk, and this friend of mine, and this, of course, was when he was just starting to run for office. This friend of mine was taking pictures, and we had these great pictures of Ron Jr. Stuffing these giant marijuana plants in his trunk. And I thought once Reagan was really running, I thought, wouldn't these pictures be lovely in some tabloid? It would just sort of make him such a more interesting guy running for president, which we never did. But one day they didn't give him money. He lived in this little room above someone's garage, and I was up there with him, and we were smoking a joint, and we see Nancy walking up the driveway with her maid trailing behind her, the caricature of the black maid from another time period. And he said, oh, fuck, there's Nancy. She comes around once in a while to make sure my place is clean. So we're opening windows and trying to blow smoke out and everything. And I said, listen, I'm going to run. You just, have a good chat with Nancy. It was just such a funny moment. We had some interesting people. Oh, I got so much better picture. I mean, you can't really appreciate America unless you see it from another country's point of view. And when I went to college in England, it was mid-60s, and looking back on America at that time and the European and English point of view of America gave me a much better picture, because when you're a country that is isolated by great oceans and you cannot avoid the cultural brainwashing, America's right, everything, and then you go somewhere else and you get this other perspective. It's like, oh yeah, I know what they're talking about. How come nobody else gets this kind of reporting without leaving the country? Of course, since then, things have changed greatly. But in Europe, you're so fortunate because everything is so close and everything spills across borders. It's something you have to concern yourself with.
Yeah, I think these days through the internet, it's easier to get that different kind of perspective. I remember, I don't know who said it, but somebody said that, when I want to, somebody from America said, if I want to know what's going on in my country, then I'll watch a British news station. And I guess it's still true to some extent, but it's just become so much easier to get that kind of information.
Oh, completely. Yeah. It's a different world in so many ways. Better in some ways, but for every alleged advance, something is sacrificed, it seems. Lose something. And just particularly environmentally, with the awareness on so many levels of the destruction of the planet and the species, and the fact that so few people really care. Really, I mean, enough to elect someone who will do something about it. I mean, the planet won't survive unless we make dramatic changes, but all anyone's concerned with is next week.
Yeah, and how to make a profit and how to let everything grow beyond comparison. Yeah.